found in a sealed storage unit after 19 years, the last clue to a missing woman. The rust on the lock was a deep, angry red, the color of dried blood. It had been 19 years since anyone had touched it, 19 years of rain and sun, and silence. The air in the U-Storage facility was thick with the smell of old dust and forgotten things, a graveyard of memories nobody wanted anymore. For Detective Miles Corrigan, it smelled like a tomb. He stood with his hands on his hips, his cheap suit jacket pulled tight across his broad shoulders. Watching the kid from the facility struggle with a pair of bolt cutters, the kid, no older than 20, grunted with the effort, his face screwed up in concentration. "You sure about this, detective?" the kid asked, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow with the back of a greasy hand. "Manager said this unit's been paid up, on time, every single month for 19 years, automatic withdrawal, never a late fee." Miles just grunted, a sound that was more weariness than affirmation. The account that's been paying for it was just closed. The owner was declared dead. "That's why we're here." He didn't add that the owner was a shell corporation that had folded a week ago. Its assets liquidated, its paper trail a dead end. He didn't add that the name on the rental agreement, John Smith, was as fake as a $3 bill. He just waited, the silence stretching between them, thick and heavy. With a final violent snap, the lock broke. The sound echoed in the long, cavernous hallway of identical orange doors, a sharp crack that seemed to break the spell of the place. The kid stepped back, breathing heavily, and looked at Miles. "It's all yours," he said, his voice a little shaky. Miles nodded and pulled on a pair of latex gloves. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He'd been a cop for 25 years, and he'd seen it all. Or so he thought. But this case, the disappearance of 19-year-old Amelia Hayes, had been different. It was the one that had gotten under his skin, the one that had haunted his dreams for nearly 2 decades. She had vanished without a trace from her college dorm room, leaving behind a half-finished cup of tea and a textbook open to a chapter on existential philosophy. No signs of a struggle, no ransom note, no body, just gone. The case had gone cold faster than any he'd ever worked. It was a ghost story, a local legend whispered by college students to scare the freshmen. But for Miles, it was a failure. That had defined his career. He reached for the roll-up door, his fingers finding the cold, corrugated metal. He pulled, and with a screech of protest from the rusted tracks, the door began to rise. A wave of stale, cold air washed over him, a smell that was different from the ambient dust of the facility. It was a smell he knew all too well. The smell of decay. Not of a body, not exactly, but of something that had once been alive and was now not. The light from the bare bulb in the hallway spilled into the darkness of the unit, revealing the scene within. It wasn't cluttered. It wasn't a chaotic jumble of boxes and old furniture. It was a meticulously arranged tableau, a diorama of a life interrupted. In the center of the small 10-by-10 space was a single wooden chair. On the chair sat a life-size doll, the kind with porcelain skin and glassy, unblinking eyes. It was dressed in a pale blue dress, the fabric faded and brittle with age. The doll's blonde hair was neatly combed, its hands folded primly in its lap. But it wasn't the doll that made Miles's blood run cold, it was what was arranged around it. To the left, a small wooden desk, a replica of the one from Amelia's dorm room. On it, a cup of tea, the liquid long since evaporated, leaving a dark brown stain at the bottom. An open textbook, its pages yellowed and curled. To the right, a single bed, neatly made, with a worn teddy bear propped against the pillow. It was her room. A perfect, chilling recreation of the last place she was ever seen. Miles felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just a storage unit. This was a shrine. A monument to a crime. He stepped inside, his shoes crunching on the dusty concrete floor. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in every detail. The posters on the wallaband he didn't recognize, a Monet print, were the same ones from the crime scene photos. The clothes hanging in a small makeshift closet were her style. The cheap, trendy fashion of the early 2000s. It was all there. Everything but her. He moved closer to the doll, his heart pounding in his chest. The porcelain face was eerily lifelike, the painted-on smile, a grotesque parody of happiness. And then he saw it. Around the doll's neck, on a thin silver chain, was a locket. It was small and heart-shaped, tarnished with age. He recognized it instantly. It was the locket Amelia's grandmother had given her, the one she never took off. He'd seen it in every picture of her. A tiny silver heart resting against her collarbone. His hand trembled as he reached out and touched the locket. It was cold, unnervingly so. With a flick of his thumbnail, he opened it. Inside, on one side, was a faded, microscopic picture of a smiling, older woman Amelia's grandmother. On the other side, where a picture of Amelia should have been, was a tiny folded piece of paper. He carefully extracted it with a pair of tweezers from his kit. The paper was old and fragile, threatening to crumble in his grasp. He unfolded it, his breath catching in his throat. On it, in neat block letters, was a single sentence. "I know where the body is." And beneath it, a name. Not Amelia's, not John Smith's. A name he hadn't seen in 19 years. A name that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Julian Croft. The name hit him like a physical blow. Julian Croft, the golden boy. The charismatic, wealthy, untouchable son of the city's most powerful real estate mogul. He had been a person of interest in the original investigation, a classmate of Amelia's who had a reputation for being intense. But his alibi had been rock solid, his family's lawyers a brick wall of legal obstruction. He'd been cleared, his name wiped from the official record. But Miles had never been convinced. He'd always had a gut feeling about Croft. A cold, hard certainty that the kid was hiding something, and now, this. A secret shrine, a doll dressed in Amelia's clothes, wearing her locket, with a note that was essentially a confession. It was a bombshell, a ghost from the past rising up to scream the truth. But why now? Why, after 19 years of silence, would this clue surface? He backed out of the unit, his mind reeling. He needed to call it in, to get a forensics team down here, to start the process of tearing this place apart. But as he turned, his eyes caught something else, something he had missed in his initial shock. Tucked away in the corner, behind the bed, was a small wooden chest. It was old and bound in leather straps, the kind of thing you'd find in an antique shop or a pirate movie. It seemed out of place in the otherwise perfect recreation of the dorm room. He approached it slowly. A sense of dread washing over him, he knelt down and ran his gloved hand over the dusty lid. There was no lock. He lifted the lid, and the hinges creaked in protest. Inside, nestled on a bed of red velvet, was a collection of old VHS tapes. There were at least a dozen of them, each one labeled with a single date. The dates spanned a period of 6 months, leading up to the day Amelia disappeared. His heart hammered against his ribs. He picked up the top tape. The date on the label was October 17, 2005. The day before she went missing. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. This was it. This was the missing piece. The clue that would finally break the case wide open. He stood up, the tape clutched in his hand. He had to get this back to the station, to find a VCR, to see what was on it. He turned to leave, his mind already racing ahead, planning his next move. The questions he would ask, the warrants he would get. But as he stepped out of the unit, something crunched under his foot. He looked down. It was a small plastic flower, the kind you'd find on a doll's dress. It must have fallen off the one in the chair. He bent down to pick it up, and that's when he saw it. Scratched into the concrete floor, almost invisible in the dim light, was a message. It wasn't in neat block letters like the note in the locket. This was a frantic, desperate scrawl. The work of someone in a hurry. Someone terrified. He's watching. Miles froze, his blood turning to ice. He slowly straightened up, his eyes darting around the long, empty hallway of orange doors. The silence of the place suddenly felt different. It wasn't empty. It was attentive. He felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. He was alone in the hallway. The kid from the facility was long gone, but he wasn't alone. He spun around, his hand instinctively going to the gun on his hip. The hallway was empty. Just a long, silent corridor of identical doors, stretching into the dimness. But the feeling persisted, a cold, heavy presence that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the place. He took a step back, his eyes scanning the shadows, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. And then he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. A soft, metallic click. It came from somewhere down the hall, from one of the other units. It was the sound of a lock being turned. From the inside, he drew his weapon, the cold steel, a small comfort in his trembling hand. "Police," he shouted, his voice echoing in the silence. "Show yourself." There was no answer. Just the oppressive, watchful silence. He took a cautious step forward, his gun held out in front of him, his eyes straining to pierce the gloom. He moved slowly, deliberately, his senses on high alert. He passed door after door, each one a blank orange face, hiding its secrets. He reached the end of the hallway and found nothing. No one. He turned back, his frustration mounting. Was he imagining things? Was the stress of the case finally getting to him? He started to lower his gun, to dismiss it as a trick of his overactive imagination. But then he saw it. One of the doors, about halfway down the hall, was slightly ajar. Just a crack, no more than an inch. But it hadn't been opened before. He was sure of it. He approached it slowly, his heart in his throat. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun. It swung inward with a low groan, revealing the darkness within. He flicked on the flashlight attached to his gun, the beam cutting through the blackness. The unit was empty. Completely, utterly empty. Just a bare concrete box. He swept the light across the floor, the walls, the ceiling. Nothing. He was about to turn away, to write it off as a faulty latch or a trick of the light, when his beam caught something on the back wall. A single word, spray-painted, in stark black letters, "Hello," and beneath it, a freshly painted, still dripping smiley face. The paint was so fresh, he could smell the acrid fumes. Whoever had done this had been here just moments ago. They had been watching him. They had been toying with him. A wave of nausea washed over him. He stumbled back out of the unit, his mind struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't just a cold case. This was a game, a sick, twisted game that had been going on for 19 years, and he had just been invited to play. He leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at the VHS tape in his hand, then back at the open door of the empty unit. He was a pawn in someone else's game, a puppet on a string, and the puppet master was still here, somewhere in the shadows, watching his every move. He had to get out of there. He had to get the tape to safety. He turned and ran, his footsteps echoing in the long, silent hallway. He didn't look back. He didn't dare. He just ran, the cold, stale air of the storage facility burning in his lungs. The feeling of being watched boring into his back like a physical touch. He burst out into the late afternoon sun, blinking against the sudden brightness. He stood there for a moment, gasping for air, his heart pounding like a drum. He looked back at the building, a long, featureless block of concrete and orange doors. It looked so ordinary, so mundane, but he knew what was inside. A ghost, a secret, and a killer who was just getting started. The weight of the last 19 years settled on him, heavier than ever before. He had failed Amelia Hayes, he had let her down. But now, he had a second chance. A chance to find the truth, to get justice, to finally put her ghost to rest. He looked at the tape in his hand, the key to it all. He knew what he had to do. He had to watch it. He had to see what secrets it held. He had to face the monster who had created that twisted shrine. And he had to do it before the monster found him, because he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the game had just begun. And he was the next piece to be moved. Amelia Hayes was 19 when she disappeared. But in the memories of those who loved her, she was forever frozen in time. sun-drenched photograph of a girl on the cusp of womanhood. To her mother, Eleanor, she was the sound of laughter echoing in their small suburban home, the smell of cinnamon and sugar from her late-night baking experiments, the feel of her small hand tucked into hers as they walked through the park. Eleanor Hayes was a woman hollowed out by grief, a ghost in her own life. For 19 years, she had existed in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a phone call, a knock on the door, a sign that her daughter was coming home. Her house was a museum of Amelia's life, her room untouched, her clothes still hanging. In the closet, her scent slowly fading from the pillows. Eleanor spoke of her daughter in the present tense, as if she had just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. Amelia loves the rain, she would say, looking out the window on a stormy day. She always said it sounded like the world was crying, and it made her feel less alone. Miles had interviewed Eleanor dozens of times over the years, and each time was like reopening a wound that had never healed. She would sit in her floral armchair, her hands clutching a framed photo of Amelia, her eyes distant and lost. She would tell him the same stories, the same memories, her voice a fragile whisper. She was a woman drowning in hope, and Miles knew that the truth, if he ever found it, would be the wave that finally pulled her under. Then there was Julian Croft, the antagonist, the name on the note. In 2005, he was the campus prince, the heir to the Croft real estate empire, a young man with a dazzling smile and a darkness in his eyes that only a few people ever saw. He was charming, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. He moved through the world with an unshakable sense of entitlement, as if the rules that applied to everyone else were beneath him. He and Amelia had been in the same advanced literature class, and by all accounts, he had been obsessed with her. He'd pursued her relentlessly, showering her with gifts, writing her poetry, cornering her in the library. Amelia, a quiet, introspective girl, had been unnerved by his intensity. She had politely rebuffed his advances, a rejection that Julian Croft was not accustomed to. His father, Alistair Croft, was a titan of industry, a man who moved mountains with a single phone call. He was a cold, calculating patriarch who valued power and control above all else. When the police had first questioned Julian, Alistair had descended upon the station with a team of high-priced lawyers, his face a mask of controlled fury, had produced an airtight alibi for his sooner dinner with a city councilman. Backed up by receipts and eyewitnessism, had threatened to sue the department for harassment. The investigation into Julian had been shut down before it had even begun. Alistair had protected his son, burying the truth under a mountain of money and influence. He was a man who believed that everything, and everyone, had a price. And then there was the hidden witness. The one person who knew more than they were saying. Her name was Sarah Jenkins, and she had been Amelia's roommate. In 2005, she was a timid, anxious girl, constantly living in the shadow of her more confident, outgoing friend. She had worshipped Amelia, but she had also been deeply afraid of Julian Croft. She had seen the way he looked at Amelia, the possessive glint in his. Either way, his smile never quite reached them. She had been there the night Julian had shown up at their dorm room, drunk and angry, demanding to see Amelia. She had hidden in her room, listening to his slurred threats, his desperate pleas. She had heard Amelia's firm, unwavering voice telling him to leave, and then the sound of a door slamming. She had never told the police the full extent of what she had witnessed that night. She had been too scared. Scared of Julian, scared of his powerful father, scared of what would happen to her if she spoke up, so she had stayed silent. For 19 years, she had carried the weight of that silence, the guilt, a constant gnawing presence in her life. She was a teacher now, married with 2 children, her life a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. But the past was a ghost that haunted her, and the memory of Amelia's face, pale and frightened, was a wound that had never healed. Miles found her in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Her house, a picture of domestic tranquility. She opened the door, and for a moment, he saw the same scared, 19-year-old girl he had interviewed all those years ago. Her eyes widened in recognition, and a flicker of fear crossed her face. Detective Corrigan, she said, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? I need to talk to you, Sarah, he said, his voice gentle but firm. It's about Amelia. She let him in, her hands trembling as she led him to the living room. Her husband was at work, her children at school. They were alone. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the floor. They found something, she said, her voice flat. Didn't they? Miles nodded. We found a storage unit. It was a recreation of your old dorm room, with a doll and a note. Sarah's face went pale. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else. Relief. Julian, she whispered. It was him, wasn't it? His name was on the note, Miles confirmed. Sarah, I need you to tell me everything. Everything. You remember about him. Everything you were too afraid to tell me back then. She hesitated, her gaze darting towards the window, as if she expected to see Julian Croft standing on her lawn. She took a deep, shuddering breath, and then she began to speak. The words came out in a torrent, a confession that had been dammed up for 19 years. She told him about Julian's relentless pursuit of Amelia, his obsessive behavior, his chilling refusal to take no for an answer. She told him about the late-night phone calls, the anonymous gifts, the feeling of being watched. He was a predator, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. He saw Amelia as a prize to be won, not a person. And when she rejected him, he couldn't handle it. It was like it broke something inside of him. She told him about the night he had come to their dorm, the rage in his eyes, the smell of whiskey on his breath. He was screaming at her, calling her a tease, a bitch. He said that if he couldn't have her, no one could. I was so scared. I hid in my room, and I put my pillow over my head. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know. Did you see him leave? Miles asked, his voice low. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, I just heard the door slam. And then, silence. I waited for a long time, and then I came out. Amelia was gone. Her tea was still on her desk. Her book was still open. It was like she had just vanished. Why didn't you tell us this, Sarah? Miles asked, his voice laced with a gentle reproach. Why did you keep this a secret for so long? I was a kid, she sobbed, her body racked with guilt. I was terrified. His father is one of the most powerful men in the city. I thought he would destroy me. I thought he would ruin my life. So I said nothing. I lied. And I've been living with that lie ever since. Miles sat with her for a long time, letting her cry. Letting her finally release the poison that had been eating away at her for 19 years. He knew that she was just as much a victim as Amelia. A victim of fear, of intimidation, of a system that protected the rich and powerful at the expense of the innocent. He left her house with a renewed sense of purpose. He had a witness, a credible, terrified witness who could place Julian Croft at the scene of the crime on the night Amelia disappeared. It wasn't enough for a conviction, not yet, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall of silence that had surrounded this case for nearly 2 decades. His next stop was the Croft Tower, a gleaming monument to Alistair Croft's ego that pierced the city skyline. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, the air humming with the quiet efficiency of power. He was met by a phalanx of lawyers in $1,000 suits, their faces impassive, their eyes cold and reptilian. They led him to a conference room on the top floor, a room with a panoramic view of the city that Alistair Croft owned. Alistair was sitting at the head of a long, polished table, his back to the window. He was older now, his hair a shock of white, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. But his eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of emotion. He looked at Miles with a mixture of disdain and amusement, as if he were a bug to be squashed. Detective Corrigan, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. To what do I owe this unpleasant surprise? I'm here to talk to your son, Mr. Croft, Miles said, his voice steady. I have some new questions for him about the disappearance of Amelia Hayes. Alistair's smile was a thin, cruel slash across his face. My son has already answered all of your questions, Detective. 19 years ago. The case is closed. Or have you forgotten? A new lead has come to light, Miles said, his eyes locked on Alistair's. A storage unit, rented under a false name, but paid for by a shell corporation linked to your company. He saw a flicker of something in Alistair's eyes. Surprise, fear. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold, unreadable mask. I have no idea what you're talking about, Alistair said, his voice dripping with condescension. My company has hundreds of shell corporations. It's standard business practice. You're chasing ghosts, Detective. Am I? Miles said, leaning forward, his hands flat on the table. We found a note in the unit, Mr. Croft. A note with your son's name on it. A note that says he knows where Amelia's body is. The silence in the room was absolute. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Alistair's face remained impassive, but Miles could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. That's a lie, Alistair said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You're a desperate man, detective. A washed-up cop trying to make a name for himself by harassing my family. You have nothing. No evidence, no witnesses, no case. Now get out of my building before I have you thrown out. Miles stood up, his chair scraping against the marble floor. I'll be back, Croft, he said, his voice low and even. I'll be back with a warrant. And this time, your money and your lawyers won't be able to save him. He turned and walked out of the room, the eyes of the lawyers boring into his back. He could feel Alistair's hatred following him, a cold, palpable force. He knew that he had just declared war. A war against a man who had no morals, no conscience, no limits. A man who would do anything to protect his son. That as he rode the elevator down, he thought about the VHS tape in his pocket. It was the key, the one piece of evidence that could bring the whole house of cards crashing down. He had to watch it. He had to see what was on it. He had to know what Julian Croft had done to Amelia Hayes. He stepped out of the elevator and into the bustling lobby. He was halfway to the door when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He answered it, his heart pounding in his chest. Hello, there. Was silence on the other end of the line. And then, a voice. A voice he hadn't heard in 19 years. A voice that was older, deeper, but still held the same chilling, arrogant tone. You're making a mistake, detective, the voice said. A very big mistake. You should have left it alone. You should have let the dead stay buried. It was Julian Croft. And he sounded like a man who had nothing left to lose. The line went dead. Miles stood there, his phone clutched in his hand, the blood draining from his face. The game had just escalated. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he was no longer just the hunter, he was also the hunted. The injustice began to escalate with a brutal, chilling efficiency. The day after his confrontation with Alistair Croft, Miles found the tires of his car slashed. The word pig scratched into the driver's side door. It was a petty act of vandalism, a schoolyard taunt, but the message was clear. We're watching you, we can get to you. He reported it, of course, but he knew it was a waste of time. There were no witnesses, no security cameras in the rundown neighborhood where he lived. It was a ghost's work. Then the pressure started at the precinct. His captain, a man on the verge of retirement who wanted nothing more than a quiet end to his career, called him into his office. His face was grim, his desk littered with memos from the mayor's office, the city council, the DA. What the hell are you doing, Miles? Captain Davis demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and exhaustion. I'm getting calls from everyone. Alistair Croft is screaming bloody murder. He's threatening to sue the city for harassment. He's got half the city council in his pocket. You're stirring up a hornet's nest. I've got a real lead, Captain, Miles insisted, his voice tight with frustration. A witness. Evidence. We're close to solving a 19-year-old murder. You've got a scared woman's testimony and a storage unit full of creepy dolls. Davis shot back, his face flushed. You've got nothing concrete. Nothing that will stand up in court against Croft's army of lawyers. You're on a fishing expedition, and you're dragging the whole department through the mud with you. So what do you want me to do? Miles asked, his voice rising. Just drop it. Let them get away with it. Again, I want you to be smart, Davis said, his voice dropping to a low conspiratorial tone. I want you to tread carefully. The DA won't even consider issuing a warrant based on what you have. You need more, something undeniable. Until then, you're on a very short leash, and if you screw this up, it's not just your career on the line, it's mine. Miles left the captain's office with a bitter taste in his mouth. He was on his own. The system, the very institution he had dedicated his life to, was working against him. It was a stark, brutal reminder of the power of money and influence. Justice wasn't blind. It was for sale. He decided to focus on the one piece of evidence that couldn't be bought or intimidated: the VHS tape. He took it to a specialist in the forensics lab, a tech geek named Leo who had a passion for obsolete technology, a VCR. Leo had said, a grin spreading across his face. Man, I haven't seen one of these since my grandma's house. This is like an archaeological dig. He found a dusty, forgotten machine in a back room and hooked it up to a monitor. Miles stood behind him, his arms crossed, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The tape was old, the quality grainy and distorted. But as the image flickered to life, a chill ran down his spine. It was a video of Amelia. She was sitting on her bed in her dorm room, talking to someone off camera. She was smiling, laughing, her face full of life and innocence. It was a gut punch, a reminder of the vibrant young woman who had been stolen from the world. You're ridiculous, she was saying, her voice full of playful exasperation. You can't just buy me things, Julian. That's not how it works. The camera was shaky, as if held by someone who was trying to be discreet. The voice that answered was Julian Croft's. It was younger, but the arrogance was already there. The smooth, confident tone of a man who always got what he wanted. Why not? He asked. I can buy anything I want. I can buy you. I can buy this whole university if I wanted to. I'm not for sale, Amelia said, her smile fading, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. And you can't just film me without my permission. That's creepy. I'm not filming you, Julian, said his voice, a low, seductive purr. I'm preserving you. You're a work of art, Amelia. You deserve to be immortalized. The tape was a chilling chronicle of Julian's obsession. It was a collection of stolen moments, a visual diary of his stalking. There were clips of her walking across campus, studying in the library, laughing with friends. All of them filmed from a distance, without her knowledge. It was a violation, a slow, methodical stripping away of her privacy. Her autonomy. As Miles watched, a sense of revulsion grew in the pit of his stomach. This wasn't love. This was possession. This was the work of a predator grooming his prey. The final clip on the tape was the most disturbing. It was dated October 17, 2005, the night before she disappeared. The camera was hidden in her dorm room, positioned to get a clear view of the door. The quality was poor, the lighting dim. But the audio was clear. It was the argument Sarah had described. Julian's voice, slurred with alcohol, laced with a desperate, pathetic rage. Amelia's voice, firm and unwavering, telling him to leave. The sound of the door slamming. And then, silence. The camera kept rolling for another hour. An hour of an empty room, a silent testament to her absence. And then, just before the tape cut out, the door opened again. A figure stepped into the room. It was too dark to make out their face, but Miles could see that they were wearing dark clothes, their features obscured by a baseball cap. The figure moved quickly, silently. They picked up the teacup from her desk, the open book. They moved with a chilling efficiency, a practiced ease. They were cleaning up, erasing her. Miles felt a cold dread wash over him. This was it. This was the proof. This was the undeniable evidence he needed. He had them. But as he turned to leave the lab, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It was a picture. A picture of Sarah Jenkins's two young children playing in a park. The photo was taken from a distance, through a telephoto lens. It was a clear, unmistakable threat. The blood drained from his face. He called Sarah immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice frantic. "They were here," she sobbed. "A man. He came to the school. He said he was a photographer for the local paper, that he was doing a story on the school. He took pictures of the kids. Of my kids? Oh my God, what have I done?" "Sarah, listen to me," Miles said, his voice calm and steady, belying the storm of rage and fear that was raging inside of him. "You need to pack a bag, you and the kids. Go to your sister's house in the next state. Don't tell anyone where you're going. I'll handle this." He hung up the phone, his hand shaking with fury. They had crossed a line. They had threatened a witness's children. This was no longer just about a cold case. This was about protecting an innocent family from a monster. He went back to the captain, the VHS tape in a sealed evidence bag. He slammed it down on his desk. "Watch it," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Watch it, and then tell me I don't have a case." Davis watched the tape, his face growing paler with each passing minute. When it was over, he sat in silence for a long time, his eyes fixed on the blank screen. "My God," he whispered. "He's a monster." "Now, will you get me a warrant?" Miles demanded. Davis nodded, his face grim. "I'll get you a warrant, but you have to be careful, Miles. These people are dangerous. They'll stop at nothing to protect themselves." The warrant was issued, but it was too late. When Miles and a team of officers arrived at Julian Croft's sprawling mansion, he was gone. His closets were empty, his personal effects gone. He had vanished, just like Amelia. But he had left something behind. On the nightstand next to his bed was a single, pristine, white orchid. And next to it, a small, handwritten note. "Catch me if you can." It was a taunt, a challenge, a declaration of war. And Miles knew that this was just the beginning. The real fight was yet to come. He had poked the beast, and now it was out of its cage, and it was coming for him. The humiliation was a slow public bleed. The story of the botched raid on Julian Croft's empty mansion was leaked to the press, spun by Alistair Croft's high PR team into a narrative of police incompetence and harassment. Miles was painted as a rogue cop with a personal vendetta, a man obsessed with a cold case, willing to trample on the civil rights of a prominent family to satisfy his own ego. His picture was splashed across the front page of the city's tabloids, his face a grim, determined mask that was easily twisted into a caricature of obsession. The department, under immense pressure from the mayor's office, officially suspended him. He was forced to turn in his badge and his gun, the cold, heavy weight of the metal, a stark reminder of the life that had been stripped away from him. He was a pariah, a man without a tribe. His colleagues avoided his calls, their silence a deafening chorus of betrayal. He was alone, cut adrift in a sea of his own making. But the public humiliation was nothing compared to the private torment. He was being followed. A black sedan with tinted windows would be parked outside his apartment in the morning, and it would be there when he got back at night. His phone made strange clicking noises, his emails were opened before he read them. He was living in a state of constant low-grade paranoia. The feeling of being watched, a constant, oppressive weight on his shoulders. He knew it was Alistair's doing. A campaign of psychological warfare designed to break him, to make him give up, but it had the opposite effect. It fueled his rage, hardened his resolve. He would not be broken. He would not be silenced. He continued his investigation on his own time. Working out of his cramped apartment, the walls covered in crime scene, photos, timelines, and maps. He was a man possessed, fueled by coffee and a burning desire for justice. He re-interviewed everyone connected to the case, no matter how remote. He dug into the Croft family's finances, their business dealings, their political connections. He was looking for a crack, a weakness, a loose thread that he could pull on to unravel the whole rotten tapestry. He found it in the most unlikely of places, a disgruntled former employee of Croft Enterprises, a man who had been fired for a minor infraction and was eager for revenge. The man told him about a secret property the Crofts owned, a remote hunting lodge deep in the mountains, miles from the nearest town. It was a place where Alistair and Julian would go to entertain. A place where the normal rules didn't apply. They're animals. Both of them, the man said. His voice a low, bitter whisper. They think they're gods. They think they can do whatever they want and get away with it. Miles knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that this was where he would find the answers. This was where Julian had taken Amelia. This was where the final horrific act of the tragedy had played out. He drove up to the lodge alone. His old beat-up car struggling up the winding, unpaved road. The lodge was a sprawling rustic mansion of dark wood and stone, nestled in a clearing in the dense forest. It was a place of isolation, of secrecy, of silence. He broke in through a back window, his heart pounding in his chest. The inside of the lodge was a monument to masculine excess. Animal heads, mounted on the walls, their glassy eyes staring down at him. A massive stone fireplace, big enough to stand in. A fully stocked bar, with bottles of expensive whiskey and brandy. He searched the lodge from top to bottom, his flashlight cutting through the dusty gloom. He found nothing. No sign of a struggle, no evidence of a crime. He was about to give up, to write it off as another dead end, when he noticed something odd. In the master bedroom, there was a large, ornate Persian rug on the floor. It was beautiful, but it seemed out of place in the otherwise rustic decor. He knelt down and lifted the edge of the rug. Underneath, there was a trapdoor. He pulled it open, revealing a set of steep narrow stairs leading down into the darkness. A wave of cold, damp air washed over him, carrying with it a faint metallic smell. The smell of old blood. He descended the stairs, his flashlight beam cutting a shaky path in front of him. The stairs led to a small, windowless cellar. The walls were stone, the floor dirt. In the center of the room was a single rusty chain hanging from the ceiling, and on the floor, directly beneath it, was a dark, ugly stain. He knew what this place was. It was a dungeon, a torture chamber, a place where unspeakable things had happened. He swept his light across the room, and that's when he saw it. Scratched into the stone wall, in a faint, almost invisible scrawl, was a single word: sorry. It was a final, desperate apology from a young woman who knew she was about to die. It was a ghost's last whisper. He reached out and touched the letters, his fingers tracing the lines of her final, heartbreaking message. He felt a wave of grief and rage wash over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He had found her, or at least, the place where she had taken her last breath. He stood there for a long time, the silence of the cellar pressing in on him. He knew he had to call it in, to get a forensics team up here. But he also knew that it wouldn't be enough. A bloodstain and a scratch on the wall weren't enough to convict a Croft. He needed more. He needed the body. He searched the cellar, his hands digging into the cold, damp earth. He searched for hours, his muscles aching, his hands raw. He found nothing. No bones, no clothes, no physical evidence of her presence. It was another dead end, another ghost. He was about to leave, his heart heavy with defeat, when his foot kicked something hard under the dirt. He knelt down and dug it out. It was a small metal box, rusted and corroded with age. He pried it open, and inside, nestled on a bed of rotted fabric, was a small leather-bound diary. He opened it, his hands trembling. The pages were filled with a neat, elegant script. It was Amelia's diary, her final words, her testament. He began to read, and the full, horrific story of her final days unfolded before him. She wrote about Julian's obsession, his stalking, his escalating aggression. She wrote about her fear, her sense of being trapped, her growing realization that he was not just a lovesick boy, but a dangerous, unstable predator. She wrote about the night he had abducted her from her dorm room, drugging her and taking her to the lodge. She described the cellar in chilling detail. The cold, the darkness, the feeling of utter hopelessness. She wrote about the things he had done to her, the physical and psychological torture he had subjected her to. It was a litany of horrors, a descent into a private hell from which there was no escape. The final entry was dated October 23, 2005. Her handwriting was shaky, almost illegible. He told me today that he's going to kill me. He said that if he can't have me, no one can. He said that he's going to bury me somewhere, no one will ever find me. I'm so scared, I don't want to die. Please, someone, find me. Please, don't let him get away with this. My name is Amelia Hayes, and I was here. Miles closed the diary, his eyes burning with unshed tears. He had it, he had the confession, he had the motive, he had the whole sordid story, in her own words. This was the weapon that would finally bring the Crofts down. He stood up, the diary clutched in his hand. He had to get it to the DA. He had to get it to the press. He had to make sure that everyone knew what Julian Croft had done. He climbed the stairs out of the cellar, his mind racing. He was no longer just a disgraced cop. He was an avenger. He was the voice of the dead, and he would not be silenced. He stepped out of the lodge and into the fading light of the afternoon. He was halfway to his car when he heard the sound of a twig snapping in the woods behind him. He spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun that was no longer there. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. It was Julian Croft. He was older, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. He was holding a hunting rifle. The barrel pointed directly at Miles's chest. "I told you to leave it alone, detective," Julian said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "You should have listened." Miles stood his ground, his heart pounding in his chest. He held up the diary. "It's over, Julian," he said, his voice steady. "I know what you did. I have the proof." A slow, cruel smile spread across Julian's face. "A diary," he said, with a soft, mocking laugh. "You think a little girl's diary is going to save you? You're more naive than I thought." He raised the rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "You came here looking for a ghost, detective," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Well, you found one. Now you're going to join her." The forest was silent. The only sound, the ragged rhythm of Miles's own breathing. He was staring down the barrel of a gun, his life hanging by a thread. He had found the truth, but it had led him to a dead end. A final, fatal confrontation with the monster he had been hunting for 19 years, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that only one of them was going to walk out of these woods alive. The plot twist didn't come from a courtroom or a confession. It came from the ghost in the machine. As Julian's finger tightened on the trigger, a sound cut through the tense silence of the forest. It was a high-pitched electronic squeal, the sound of a feedback loop. It came from a small, almost invisible earpiece tucked into Julian's ear. He flinched, his head jerking to the side, his aim wavering for a fraction of a second. "What the hell?" he muttered, his eyes darting around the empty woods. And then, a voice that was both familiar and utterly alien. It was Alistair Croft's voice, but it was distorted, digitized, coming through the earpiece with a cold, metallic rasp. "Put the gun down, Julian." Julian froze, his face a mask of confusion and disbelief. "Dad, what are you doing? How are you?" "I'm everywhere, son," the voice said, the tone flat and devoid of emotion. "I'm always watching. I've been watching you since the day you were born. I've been cleaning up your messes for just as long." Miles's mind reeled. Alistair was on the other end of that line. He was listening. He was directing this. This wasn't just a confrontation between a killer and a cop. This was a puppet show, and Alistair Croft was pulling the strings. "What are you talking about?" Julian stammered, his bravado crumbling, replaced by the petulant whine of a spoiled child. "I'm handling this. I'm fixing the problem." "You are the problem, Julian," the voice said, the words like chips of ice. "You've always been the problem. You're weak, you're sloppy, you're an embarrassment." A memory flashed in Miles's mind. The empty storage unit. The freshly painted smiley face. The taunt, "Hello." It wasn't Julian. It was Alistair. He had been one step ahead of him the whole time. He had led him here. He had orchestrated this whole confrontation. But why? "I did it for you, Dad," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. "I did it to protect the family name." She was going to talk. She was going to ruin us. She was a child, the voice said, with a chilling lack of inflection. A nobody. She was a loose end. And you, my son, you are a loose end that I can no longer afford. The full horrific conspiracy began to dawn on Miles. This wasn't about protecting Julian. This was about eliminating him. Alistair was cutting his losses. He was sacrificing his own son to protect the family empire. "What are you saying?" Julian whispered, his face ashen. "You're a liability, Julian," the voice said. "You've outlived your usefulness. The detective here, he's a bulldog. He won't let this go. He'll keep digging until he brings the whole house down. And I can't have that. So, I'm going to give him what he wants. I'm going to give him a body." Julian's eyes widened in terror. He looked at Miles, then back at the empty woods, as if searching for an escape that wasn't there. "No," he whispered. "You can't." "I can," the voice said. "And I will. It's just business, son. You, of all people, should understand that." And then, a new sound. The crunch of leaves, the snap of a twig. A figure stepped out from behind a tree, not 10 feet from Julian. It was a man in a dark suit, his face impassive, his eyes hidden behind a pair of sunglasses. He was holding a silenced pistol, the barrel pointed directly at Julian's head. He was Alistair's cleaner, his fixer, the man who made the problems. "Go away." Julian stumbled back, his rifle forgotten, his face a mask of pure animal terror. "No," he screamed, his voice a high-pitched, pathetic wail. "Please, Dad, no." The man in the suit didn't hesitate. There was a soft, almost inaudible "fet," and a small, dark hole appeared in the center of Julian's forehead. His eyes went wide with surprise, and then they went blank. He crumpled to the ground like a marionette with its strings cut, his body landing in a heap at the base of a tree. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of a bird singing somewhere in the distance. Miles stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the scene that had just unfolded before him. He had just witnessed a father ordering the execution of his own son. It was a level of cold, calculating evil that he had never encountered before. The man in the suit walked over to Julian's body and picked up the hunting rifle. He then walked over to Miles and held it out to him, handle first. "Take it," the man said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. "The official story will be that you shot him in self-defense. He was a fugitive, armed and dangerous. You had no choice. You'll be a hero." Miles stared at the rifle, then at the man's impassive face. "And what about Amelia?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What about her body?" The man nodded towards a small, overgrown path that led deeper into the woods. "Down that path, about 100 yards, there's a well. He put her down there. We'll make an anonymous tip. You'll find her. You'll close the case. Everyone gets what they want. Everyone except Amelia. Everyone except the truth." "And Alistair?" Miles asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "He just walks away. He gets away with all of this." The man's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Mr. Croft is a businessman," he said. "He's just balancing the books. His son was a bad investment. He's cutting his losses. Now, take the gun, detective. It's the only way this ends well for you." Miles looked at the rifle, then at Julian's body, then back at the man. He was being offered a deal with the devil. He could be a hero. He could close the case. He could finally give Eleanor Hayes the closure she so desperately needed. All he had to do was play along. All he had to do was become a part of the lie, but he couldn't do it. He couldn't let Alistair win. He couldn't let him get away with murder. He looked at the man, his eyes blazing with a cold, hard fury. "No," he said, his voice low and even. "I don't think so." He turned and ran. He ran back towards the lodge, the man's surprised shout echoing behind him. He didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't have a plan. All he knew was that he had to get away. He had to get the diary to safety. He had to expose Alistair Croft for the monster he was. He burst into the lodge, his heart pounding in his chest. He ran through the main room, his eyes darting around, looking for something, anything that he could use as a weapon. He saw the massive stone fireplace, the collection of antique firearms mounted on the wall. They were too old, probably not even functional. He ran into the kitchen, his mind racing. He grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, its weight a small comfort in his hand. He flattened himself against the wall next to the door, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He could hear the man's footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. The door creaked open, and the man stepped inside, his silenced pistol held out in front of him. He moved with a calm, professional efficiency, his eyes scanning the room. Miles held his breath, his muscles coiled, ready to strike. He knew he only had one chance. He had to make it count. As the man passed him, he swung the skillet with all his might, a desperate primal scream tearing from his throat. The skillet connected with the side of the man's head with a sickening thud. The man grunted in surprise and pain, stumbling forward, his gun clattering to the floor. Miles didn't hesitate. He kicked the gun away and brought the skillet down. Again, this time on the man's back. The man went down, his body hitting the floor with a heavy thud. He was unconscious, but he was still breathing. Miles stood over him, his chest heaving, the skillet clutched in his hand. He had done it. He had survived. But he knew that this was far from over. Alistair was still out there, still pulling the strings, and he would not stop until Miles was dead. He looked at the man on the floor, then at the gun. He knew what he had to do. He had to turn the tables. He had to stop being the hunted and become the hunter. He picked up the gun and the earpiece that had fallen from the man's ear. He put the earpiece in his own ear and pressed the small button on the side. "It's done," he said, his voice a low, gravelly imitation of the Fixer's. "The detective is dead, and so is the boy." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. And then, Alistair Croft's voice, full of a cold, satisfied finality. "Good," he said. "Leave the bodies. The animals will take care of them. Come home." The line went dead. Miles stood there, the gun in his hand, a cold, hard smile on his face. Alistair thought he was safe. He thought he had one. But he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the man he was trying to destroy. Miles had the gun, he had the diary, and he had a direct line to the man who had ordered the murder of his own son. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever. And he was about to make his next move. He was going to burn Alistair Croft's empire to the ground. And he was going to do it with Alistair's own words. The cinematic payoff wasn't a courtroom bombshell. It was a corporate execution, broadcast live to the world. Miles knew he couldn't beat Alistair Croft in a court of law. The man's power and influence were too vast, his web of corruption too deep. So he decided to fight him on his own turf. The world of business, of public perception, of media manipulation. He spent the next 24 hours in a feverish haze of planning and preparation. He found a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, paid for in cash. He bought a burner phone and a laptop. He used the Fixer's credentials to access Croft Enterprises' internal servers, downloading every piece of incriminating evidence he could find. Financial records, offshore accounts, illegal wiretaps, blackmail files. It was a treasure trove of corporate malfeasance, a roadmap of Alistair Croft's criminal empire. But the centerpiece of his plan was the diary. Amelia's words, her story. He scanned every page, creating a high-resolution digital copy. He then sent the files, along with a detailed summary of the case and a transcript of the recording from the earpiece, to every major news outlet in the country. He sent it to the FBI, the SEC, the IRS. He sent it to a dozen different whistleblower websites and activist groups. He created a digital firestorm, an information bomb that was set to detonate at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning. The target was the annual Croft Enterprises shareholder meeting, a lavish self-congratulatory affair held in the grand ballroom of a 5-star hotel. It was Alistair Croft's coronation, his moment to stand before the world and bask in the glory of his success. It was the perfect stage for his downfall. Miles arrived at the hotel an hour before the meeting was scheduled. To begin, he was wearing a stolen maintenance uniform, a tool belt slung around his waist. He moved through the back hallways and service corridors of the hotel, his face hidden under the brim of a baseball cap. He was a ghost in the machine, an invisible agent of chaos. He found the audiovisual room, a small, cluttered space overlooking the grand ballroom. The technician, a young pimply kid, was engrossed in a game on his phone. Miles came up behind him and pressed the cold, hard barrel of the silenced pistol against his neck. "Don't make a sound," Miles whispered. "Just do exactly as I say, and you'll live to see another pimple." The kid froze, his eyes wide with terror. He nodded, his body trembling. Miles tied him to a chair and gagged him with a roll of electrical tape. He then sat down at the control panel and went to work. He bypassed the hotel's system and patched his laptop into the main feed. He was now in control of every screen, every speaker, every microphone in the ballroom. He waited. He watched as the ballroom filled with the rich and powerful, the movers and shakers of the city. They were a flock of vultures in expensive suits, their faces flushed with greed and self-importance. And then, Alistair Croft took the stage. He was a picture of power and confidence, his silver hair gleaming under the spotlights. He stood at the podium, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. He began to speak, his voice booming through the ballroom, a symphony of corporate jargon and empty promises. Miles let him talk for a few minutes. Let him bask in the adoration of his sycophants. And then, he made his move. He cut the feed. The screens behind Alistair went black. The sound system went dead. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Alistair tapped the microphone, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "We seem to be having some technical difficulties," he said. His voice strained. And then, a new image appeared on the screens. A higher resolution scan of a page from Amelia's diary. Her neat, elegant script, a stark contrast to the cold, corporate branding of Croft Enterprises. Her voice, a recording he had created with a voice actress, filled the silent ballroom. "My name is Amelia Hayes," the voice said, a young, innocent sound that was full of a heartbreaking sadness. "And this is my story." The crowd fell, silent, their eyes glued to the screens. Page after page of the diary flashed before them, a visual testament to her suffering. The voice read her words, a chilling, first-hand account of her abduction, her torture, her murder. Alistair stood at the podium, his face a mask of horror. He screamed at his security team to cut the feed, to shut it down. But it was too late. Miles had locked them out of the system. They were powerless, and then, the final devastating blow. The recording from the earpiece, Alistair's own voice, cold and ruthless, ordering the execution of his own son. "You are the problem, Julian. You've always been the problem. You're weak, you're sloppy, you're an embarrassment." The crowd gasped, a collective sound of shock and revulsion. They looked from the screens to the man on the stage, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. "I'm going to give him what he wants. I'm going to give him a body." Alistair stumbled back from the podium, his face ashen, his body trembling. He was exposed, stripped bare in front of the world. The king was naked, his crimes laid bare for all to see. "It's just business, son. You, of all people, should understand that." The recording ended, and the ballroom was plunged into a stunned, horrified silence. And then, chaos. People were screaming, shouting, running for the exits. The press, who had been covering the event, swarmed the stage, their cameras flashing, their questions a barrage of accusations. Alistair stood there, a broken man, his empire crumbling around him. He looked out at the sea of faces, at the flashing lights, at the wreckage of his life. And in that moment, he saw Miles. Standing in the back of the room, his face no longer hidden, his eyes burning with a cold, triumphant fury. Their eyes met. Across the crowded room, and in that instant, Alistair knew. He knew that he had been beaten. He knew that he had been destroyed. He knew that his reign was over. He turned and ran. He pushed his way through the crowd, his security team forming a protective bubble around him. He ran out of the ballroom, out of the hotel, out into the street. But there was nowhere to run. The police were already there, their sirens wailing, their lights flashing. They had received the anonymous tip. They had found Amelia's body. They surrounded him, their guns drawn. He stood there, a cornered animal, his face a mask of desperation and rage. He looked at the sky, at the city that he had once owned, and he let out a long, agonized scream. A scream of a man who had lost everything. Miles watched from the doorway of the hotel, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He had done it. He had gotten justice for Amelia. He had exposed the monster and burned his kingdom to the ground. He turned and walked away, melting back into the chaos of the city. He was no longer a cop. He was no longer a pariah. He was just a man who had kept a promise to a ghost. He walked until he reached the river, the cool night air, a balm on his weary soul. He took the diary out of his pocket and looked at it one last time. He thought about Amelia, about the life she had lost, about the voice that had been silenced for so long, and then, with a flick of his wrist, he threw the diary into the dark, swirling water. It was evidence, yes, but it was also a testament, a sacred text, and it had served its purpose. It was time to let it go. It was time to let her go. He stood there for a long time, watching the river flow, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The war was over. The monster was caged. And for the first time in 19 years, he felt a sense of peace. A quiet, bittersweet, and hard-won peace. The ghost was at rest. And so was he. The emotional aftermath was a quiet, somber affair, a stark contrast to the explosive public nature of Alistair Croft's downfall. The world moved on, as it always does. The headlines faded. The scandal became old news, another story in the endless cycle of greed and corruption. But for those who had been touched by the tragedy, the echoes of the past would linger forever. Amelia Hayes was finally laid to rest in a small, peaceful cemetery overlooking the ocean. It was a grey, overcast day, the sky weeping a soft, gentle rain. The funeral was a small, private affair, attended only by a handful of people who had truly known and loved her. Her mother, Eleanor, stood at the graveside, her face a mask of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. But for the first time in 19 years, there was a sense of closure in her eyes, a quiet acceptance of the terrible truth. She had her daughter back, not in the way she had always dreamed of, but in a way that allowed her to finally begin the long, slow process of healing. Miles stood at the back of the small crowd, his hands in his pockets, a silent, solitary observer. He had been reinstated to the force, his name cleared, his reputation restored. He was a hero, a celebrity, a man who had single-handedly brought down a titan. But he didn't feel like a hero, he just felt tired. The weight of the last 19 years, the ghosts he had carried, the lines he had crossed had all taken its toll. After the service, Eleanor approached him, her steps slow and deliberate. She took his hands in hers, her touch as fragile as a bird's wing. "Thank you, detective," she said, her voice a soft, trembling whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on her. Thank you for bringing my baby home." Tears welled in her eyes, and in that moment, he saw not just a grieving mother, but a woman of incredible strength and resilience, a woman who had survived the unimaginable. She was a special girl, Amelia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She deserved justice. She did, Eleanor said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. And you gave it to her. You gave her a voice. You made them listen. He watched her walk away, a small, solitary figure in the vast green expanse of the cemetery. He knew that her pain would never truly go away, but he also knew that she would survive. She would find a way to live with the ghosts, to carry the memory of her daughter not as a burden, but as a blessing. He turned to leave, and that's when he saw Sarah Jenkins. She was standing by a large oak tree, her 2 children by her side. She had come back, her fear finally conquered by her conscience. She had given her testimony to the grand jury, her voice clear and strong. Her words a damning indictment of the Croft family's reign of terror. She walked over to him, a hesitant smile on her face. "I wanted to thank you, Detective," she said. "You saved my family. You saved me. You saved yourself, Sarah," he said. "You did the right thing. You were brave." "I was scared," she admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But then I thought about Amelia. I thought about what she would have wanted me to do. And I knew I couldn't be silent anymore." She looked at her children, who were chasing each other around a nearby headstone. Their laughter, a bright, beautiful sound in the quiet sadness of the cemetery. "I'm going to tell them about her someday," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm going to tell them about their Aunt Amelia, about how brave she was, about how she never gave up hope." He left them there, a small, perfect picture of a family reborn from the ashes of tragedy. He walked back to his car, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. He felt a sense of profound, weary satisfaction. He had solved the case. He had put the bad guys away. He had done his job. But as he drove away from the cemetery, he couldn't shake the feeling of a lingering, haunting sadness. He had won the war, but the cost had been immense. A young woman's life, a family destroyed, a man's soul corrupted by power and greed. He thought about the final chilling words from Alistair Croft's confession. "It's just business." A cold, calculating justification for an act of unimaginable cruelty. It was a glimpse into the heart of a monster. A man so devoid of humanity that he could order the murder of his own son without a flicker of remorse. He knew that there were other Alistair Crofts in the world, other men who believed that they were above the law, that their wealth and power gave them the right to do whatever they wanted, and he knew that he would spend the rest of his life fighting them. It was a war that would never truly be over. He drove to the untouched facility, the place where it had all begun. The orange door of Unit 237 was now sealed with a new lock, a new layer of rust already beginning to form. He stood there for a long time, his hand resting on the cold, corrugated metal. He thought about the doll, the teacup, the open book. A twisted, pathetic shrine to a stolen life. He had solved the mystery of what was inside the unit. But the real mystery, the one that would haunt him forever, was the mystery of the human heart. The capacity for both incredible love and unimaginable evil. The fine line between obsession and devotion. Between justice and revenge. He turned and walked away, leaving the storage unit to its silence, its secrets, its ghosts. He didn't look back. He knew that some doors once opened could never truly be closed again, and some echoes, once heard, would never truly fade away. They would linger in the quiet moments, in the dead of night, a haunting reminder of the cost of truth and the price of justice. And he knew, with a weary certainty, that he would carry those echoes with him for the rest of his days.